There's a castle hidden in the heart of Scotland that makes every other house look tame. Glamis Castle isn't just old, and it isn't just haunted. The walls of this place hide secrets so dark, so terrifying, so downright bizarre, that nobody, especially not the family who live here, will talk about it. Throughout the 600 years that Glamis Castle has stood, people have vanished, rooms have been sealed, and rumours of monsters, curses and ghosts have never really gone away. Some say that there are hidden rooms inside these walls that hold the truth. Information that is so horrifying that family members refuse to be burdened with the knowledge. This castle is a place where it's impossible to separate the history, the ghosts and the folklore, so let's talk about all of it. Glamis Castle has been highly requested, and now that I've looked into it, I can see why you all wanted me to cover it. Just gotta love an old castle though, haven't you? But the history for this story starts before the castle we see today was ever built on the site. Back in the 11th century, there was a hunting lodge here. Not quite as fancy as a castle, but you know, it was under control of the crown, so it wasn't exactly a dive. But on the 25th of November, 1034, this hunting lodge would be the place where the King of Scotland would be killed. Records at the time say that King Malcolm II was mortally wounded when he went up against a group of bandits, or parricides, basically traitors to the crown. After the fight, he was taken to a room in the hunting lodge to basically be made as comfortable as possible before he died. But the legend goes that some of the king's blood from his wounds spilled on the stone floor of the lodge, and after he passed away, those bloodstains wouldn't come out. No matter how hard they scrubbed, what they used, they could not get this blood up. Suppose they didn't have hydrogen peroxide back then. A bit of that, a bar of soap, a lot of scrubbing, and usually job's a good un. And so eventually, after not wanting this blood staining the floor any longer, they actually put wood flooring down over the stone to cover it up, where supposedly, somewhere, it still remains. Yeah, from 1034 apparently. Because moving forward in time a little into the 14th century, and in 1327, the hunting lodge and the estate that it entailed were given to a guy called Sir John Lyon, as part of him being given the title Thane of Glamis. And so even though the lodge had been a royal hunting lodge, it wasn't exactly befitting as a proud family seat for a man as important as Sir John. So work began on building a castle on the site of the old lodge. But the weirdness surrounding Glamis Castle seems to have started before the building was even constructed. Apparently, the castle was originally going to be built on a nearby hill, which, if you know about castle defences and things, that's a great idea, good defensive move. However, the story goes that after the workmen had put in a full day of graft on working on the castle and had gone home for the night, fairies would invade the construction site and dismantle everything that they'd done. So the builders would show up for work in the morning and find that everything was gone and they were starting from scratch again. Apparently this happened for a couple of days, which, definition of insanity, keep doing something over and over again expecting different results? I don't know. Could have just been a fluke or something maybe that's what they were thinking. Until the workers, on showing up for work again one morning, seeing everything undone as it had been the days previous, they heard this booming voice come out of nowhere and said, "Build not on this enchanted spot, where man hath neither part nor lot, but build down in yonder bog, where it will neither shake nor shock." And that was all the encouragement they needed. Really, it wouldn't take much for me if I was doing the same day's work over and over again either, but according to the stories, that's how Glamis Castle came to be in the same site as the hunting lodge. And by extension of that, that was how the original stone floor of the lodge, the one still supposedly stained with King Malcolm II's blood, ended up as part of the castle. So the story goes. Right, so we are mere minutes into this story, and I'm already hitting you with all of these allegedlys and apparentlys and supposedlys. That is going to be the theme of the topic, I'm afraid. There are so many different versions and opinions and voices to this one, as you will very soon see. Tangling through the weeds, researching this one was super fun. I mean, I say that sarcastically, but you know I live for this stuff. And even though it was rumoured to be the work of fairies as to why Glamis Castle came to be built where it was, there were other legends on the land itself anyway. There was a little stream that ran through the estate called Dean Water, but known to locals as Dowie Dean, meaning sad, mournful, maybe a little bit sinister. And the reason for that was because this water was said to take a human life either each year, every other year, or once every 7 years, depending on which rhyme you heard about it. But either way, this stream almost demanded a sacrifice every so often to appease whatever curse or enchantment was on the land surrounding Glamis Castle. Whether the rhymes were more to do with warning children away from running water, scaring them enough to stay out of danger, you don't know, do you? But Glamis Castle itself, once it was built, it was the perfect family home for the Lion family, and became the ancestral family home for Clan Lion up to this day. The Bowes Lion, as the family is now known as, they still own the castle. Through the centuries, Glamis Castle was added to, remodelled, expanded, basically looked after and maintained, although some family members sacrificed more than others to keep the place up to scratch. When Patrick Lion inherited the titles of 3rd Earl of Kinghorn and 11th Lord Glamis from his dad in 1646, just a few weeks shy of his 3rd birthday, things were a little bit touch and go for a while. But as he got older, Lord Patrick Lion paid off the debts and made substantial improvements to the castle itself. But one of Glamis Castle's biggest claims to fame, at least nowadays, what it's commonly known for, is that it was the childhood home of Lady Elizabeth Bowes Lion, or probably better known as Her Royal Highness Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. And then even once she grew up, got married and moved away, she always loved coming back to Glamis, so much so that Princess Margaret, the late Queen's sister, she was born here in 1930. Nowadays the castle is home to Simon Bowes Lion, the 19th Earl of Strathmore and Kinghorn, but the castle itself is also open to the public. You can have a nosy inside, they offer tours, there's a gift shop, restaurant, you can even get married there too, you get the gist. But maybe while you're out there around the castle, scouting out the best locations to get your wedding photos, those wonderful mementos that you can look back on for the rest of your happily married lives, you may walk past a long sealed up entrance to a secret room, completely oblivious that anything other than a solid wall was ever there. No one could blame you for that, and I can't even tell you where in the castle this secret room may be, as no one knows. But it's said that somewhere in the castle there was a room sealed off from the rest of the residents to hide a shameful family secret, because the story goes that Glamis Castle was home to a monster. Well, he was described as a monster, and he was certainly treated like one anyway. Apparently in 1821, the 11th Earl of Strathmore and Kinghorn, Thomas Lion Bowes, and his wife had a baby boy, who was also called Thomas. Officially, he died the same day he was born, the 21st of October 1821, but rumours spread that Thomas was born with a disability, healthy but not right by societal standards at the time, and so he was quietly hidden away. His death was then announced a few days later, but no gravestone appeared, which is not super uncommon. Infant mortality rate was high back then, sometimes infants just didn't get a headstone. But these rumours carried on going, eventually whipping up into this massive story about the monster of Glamis, or the horror of Glamis, depending on which source you read. But at the heart of it, it was little Thomas, locked away in a hidden room in Glamis, denied his birthright to the earldom, and kept out of sight. Regardless of his rumoured deformities, Thomas apparently went on to live for 100 years, trapped and hidden inside Glamis Castle, only being allowed out under the cover of night for a bit of exercise along a walkway called the Mad Earl's Walk. But if he did live for that long, it became necessary that other members of the family would then need to know about this hidden room and who was supposedly hidden inside of it. But only the Earl, his heir, and the factor of Glamis Castle, basically like the estate manager, knew of his existence. The rules were that the heir to the earldom would learn the family secret on his 21st birthday. The next in line to the earldom was another Thomas, the younger brother of the little boy who was supposed to have been locked up. This Thomas died childless, so the earldom passed to his younger brother, Claude. Now Claude, he wasn't the eldest son, obviously, so he hadn't grown up as the heir, so he hadn't been told about the secret. Apparently, on becoming the 13th Earl of Strathmore and Kinghorn, he'd been let in on what had been going on. He'd been shown the secret room and had been told the truth. Learning what had happened to his eldest brother changed him. He never wanted to talk about it, and he was never really happy again. There was a story that around this time there were some workmen who were doing some work to the castle when they ventured somewhere where they shouldn't have. But while they were in this place that was off limits, they saw something that they shouldn't have, and they were very alarmed by it. Supposedly, they'd seen the so-called monster himself. On hearing what the workmen had to say, the Earl reportedly paid them a good sum of money and strongly encouraged them to emigrate to Australia, which is just as far away from Glamis Castle as possible, and maybe you want to take that story of what you saw with you kind of thing. But it really didn't seem to matter. By the 1860s, rumours were already rife about the monster of Glamis Castle. People were hearing things about the place, seeing strange figures, all attributed to this monster. Apparently there was a bishop who also heard about the legend and offered an exorcism them, as if this monster was something supernatural. But the Earl declined, saying that he was grateful, yeah, but no one can help me with this. When Claude's son, the future father of the Queen Mother, came of age, 21, and it was time to tell him the family secret, he apparently asked his dad not to tell him. I don't want to know. I've seen the weight of the world you carry from knowing this secret. Just don't tell me. I would like to live in ignorance, please. And so, because he didn't want to know, the secret died with his dad. So now, no one really knows where this secret room is. Some say it was bricked up in the 1920s after the so-called monster died, but honestly, we don't even know if that was the real secret at all. The only actual fact is, there was a child born and died in 1821, and then the next son, Thomas, inherited the earldom. There's no real proof that the eldest Thomas survived past being born, or that he had any kind of disability. Almost everything about this story, the monster, the sealed room, the family secret, is just legend. If there was a child hidden away, there wouldn't have been a supernatural element to it. It would probably have been because of a disability, which is just horrendous, but it did happen. Even more recently than that as well, the Queen Mother had 2 nieces that were sent to an asylum because they had learning difficulties. So, was Thomas locked away and made the monster of Glamis? Maybe. It is so sad, but it wouldn't have been heard of for that time. But if that was the case, and that was the secret, he never deserved to be called a monster. But even with all of that said, witness reports claimed that whatever was locked in the secret room, even if they did pass away in the 1920s, they may still be stalking the castle in death, no longer confined to the mysterious hidden room. Some have apparently seen a shadowy figure walking on Mad Earl's Walk at night, thought to be the apparition of the so-called monster. But then there was a story from the 19th century, which is perhaps the most famous encounter, and it happened to a woman called Lady Bond. She'd been staying at Glamis Castle for a spell, and she'd requested a room in the square tower. She'd gone to bed this one evening, all's good, when she woke up in the middle of the night. She kind of looked around at her surroundings and realised, yeah, no, this isn't the room that I fell asleep in. Rather than seeing a bedroom that was all nicely decorated, comfortable, all of that, the room looked more like a prison cell. Bare walls, minimal furniture, and a trough, like an animal trough. Okay, that's all very odd, but it got weirder, because she could hear movement coming from the corner. She described this figure as breathing heavily, really laboured breaths, and as her eyes adjusted to the darkness, it was rocking on the floor. The figure apparently had a rounded body with long spidery arms and crooked legs, a large beast-like head with dirty matted hair and inhumanly pointed ears. She locked eyes with this figure to see that it was staring at her with a horrible evil glare that just terrified her. But before she could do anything else, the door to the room opened, and just in that instant, the room transformed back into her normal bedroom. Blink of an eye, everything was back to normal. And so you can only imagine when that story came out, some sort of time slip, sleep paralysis perhaps thing? Yeah, that did nothing to quieten the rumours that a monster was lurking in Glamis Castle, as you can probably tell. But some people believe that the family secret was nothing to do with a child born with a deformity, but instead that every generation or so, a child is born into the family as a vampire. That's the curse that the family has. And so this secret sealed off room would be used as the vampire child's prison until they died, and the next one was born and took their place. Yeah, I told you there were some stories about this place, and we're not done with vampires even just yet. I'll be coming back to them. But the thing about Glamis Castle is that stories of secret rooms are abound. There seems to be so many, or so many different versions as to why one room has been sealed off. I suppose that's the beauty of an unsolved legend though, isn't it? You can keep it as ambiguous as you want, and no one will ever be able to call you on it, because no one knows. Because there was a story about a secret room in the castle that was said to have been sealed off for an entirely different, altogether much darker reason. Yeah, even darker than shutting away your own kid for his entire life. Sometime, possibly in the 15th century, there were 2 clans that were basically at war with each other, the Ogilvies and the Lindsays. Clan Lion, they were not involved, they were staying out of it, not my business kind of thing. Only one night, the Ogilvies came a knocking on the front door of Glamis Castle, desperately seeking shelter and to hide away from the Lindsays. The Lions, they allowed the Ogilvies inside and got them all set up in a room in the castle saying, "Don't you worry about it, we'll shelter you, get you looked after." That was that. That was all that was said, and the door was shut. But then it was locked, sealing all of the Ogilvies inside this one room, and they were left there until they starved to death. After this happened, strange noises would be heard coming from there. Screams, cries, moans of pain, and sudden banging on the door, even though months had passed, progressing into years after the deadly betrayal. Apparently this continued for 150 years. These strange noises would be heard, until in the 1870s, the Earl at the time had had enough of the constant disturbances. upstairs. He ordered for the household staff to follow the noises to the source and find out who or what was causing them. They tracked down the screams and cries to a locked up room in a part of the castle that no one really went to. The door was pried open, and the sight in there. The skeletons of the Ogilvy clan, they were just laying strewn about on the floor where they'd fallen over a century and a half ago, with some bones showing signs of gnaw marks on them. Just awful. When the Earl saw what was in that room, he immediately ordered for it to be bricked up and properly sealed forever. Although, from looking around in different places online and in the books I used for this one, some people call this particular secret room the Haunted Chamber and describe it as being completely bare now. Whitewashed walls and all of this, which suggests that it's been opened up and people know. But I couldn't get an outright straight answer, which was the conclusion that I came to for most of these stories at Glamis Castle. So if you've got more on that one, please let me know in the comments. And not necessarily related to this secret room or any particular secret room in the castle, there was another story of someone being bricked up and sealed off from the world inside Glamis Castle. A servant woman. Only she wasn't just any servant woman. Apparently she was a vampire and she was caught sucking the blood of a man. She was caught and locked up inside the castle, but she escaped twice, and so they eventually walled her up alive, or undead, inside the castle, and she's never been seen again. So that's her story anyway. Maybe she's the cause of the vampire children curse on the Bose-Lyon family? I don't know. I told you, this one was wild today. Lots of stories that absolutely wouldn't have been out of place in a Victorian Gothic horror novel. And I mean, to be fair, that's where a lot of these stories really snowballed and became the legends that we know today. It was around the 19th century where society was just endlessly curious about such things. So much so that guests of the castle around that time set out to try and find, once and for all, where this supposed secret room was, so they could learn the truth about the family secret. When the Earl was out, possibly out hunting for the day with some of his buddies, several of the guests who had been staying over took bedsheets and towels and hung them up over every window they could find. Once they were satisfied that they had covered every window in every room of the castle, they went outside to see which ones, if any, were uncovered. Now the story differs depending on which version you see. Some say that there was just one window right in the middle of the castle left uncovered. Some say there were 3 left uncovered, some 4, some as many as 12, which does nothing when you're trying to figure out just how many secret rooms there are in the castle, first of all. But all of the stories say that there was at least one window uncovered, meaning that somewhere in the castle there was a secret room, and they'd kind of deduced the general area that it was. However, apparently, either members of the family or the household staff had gone around afterwards and just taken some of the bed sheets down just to throw the guests off the scent. But to go to all of that trouble anyway, of hanging up all the bed sheets around the castle, that just goes to show how invested people were in discovering the secrets inside Glamis Castle. And I mean, maybe that's something to do with it. I don't know if that's why we've got so many different versions, so many different legends, whether they were all just people sitting around one night, you know, after a dinner party when things start winding down and you end up talking about ghosts. I mean, if you hang around me for any length of time, we eventually will probably start talking about ghosts, dinner party or not. But whether it was just that conversation, people going around speculating, and then obviously the family never confirming or denying anything, that's how this whole drama started, about this intriguing family secret that no one knows. I don't know, tell me what you think, because there are so many different versions, and they've got to have started from somewhere. Just like this version of why there is a secret sealed off room in Glamis Castle, which actually ties in again with another ghost reported to be hanging around the place. And some say this specific room is behind a brick wall in the Undercroft, or others say it's right up in a tower, which I know are 2 vastly different locations, but I'm working with what I've got, I'm doing the best I can. But the legend goes that there was a nobleman nicknamed Earl Beardy who was playing cards one Saturday night, just kicking back with his mates, chewing the fat, few drinks, few rounds of cards, you get it. Earl Beardy turns out to be a reasonably common nickname back in the day, so we don't know specifically who he was. He could have been Patrick, the first Lord of Glamis, or Alexander Lyon, the second Lord of Glamis, or even Alexander Lindsay from a completely different family, the 4th Earl of Crawford. A lot of versions point to Earl Beardy being Alexander Lindsay, who also had the nickname Tiger Earl, which is badass. Either way, there was a group of noblemen, Earl Beardy included, playing cards one night. As the night went on, things were not going Earl Beardy's way, and so he wanted to keep going to win back everything that he'd been losing all night. Eventually, a servant came into the room to remind them of the time. It was coming up to midnight when it officially becomes Sunday, the Sabbath, and you can't be gambling and playing cards on the Sabbath. The servant was waved away like, whatever, we got time. But growing more concerned, at 5 minutes to midnight, the servant came into the room again. Like, sirs, you really need to stop, it's nearly the Sabbath. At that point, Earl Beardy roared at him them to get out. Stop interrupting. I'll play till doomsday if I fancy it. But around the table, the others were looking a bit like, well, I don't want to play on the Sabbath. I'd like my soul to go to heaven, actually. And so they were a bit like, I'm out. This enraged Earl Beardy. He shouted about how no one would play him. No one wants to take him on. Fine, I'll play the devil himself. No one's going to stop me, especially not a little thing like religious rules. Just after saying that, at the stroke of midnight, there was a knock on the door to the room that the noblemen were in, and a tall stranger entered, asking if he could join the game. Earl Beardy gestured for him to take a seat. Absolutely, he finally had someone to play against. The stranger's bet was a little odd though. He wagered a purse full of rubies for Earl Beardy's soul. Earl Beardy accepted the terms, and so the card game started. Everyone was ordered out of the room. Not that any of them wanted to stay anyway. I don't want to be seen to be partaking in gambling now that it was officially the Sabbath. The servant got curious though, and so he looked through the keyhole into the room to see that the whole room was engulfed in flames, and in the middle of it, the two men were just playing cards as if nothing was amiss. At that moment though, a blinding light shot through the keyhole and apparently left the servant blind in that eye, so he didn't bother spying on any more of the game. Not too long after that though, shouting voices could be heard coming from the room. It was Earl Beardy, and he was absolutely furious again. When the door was opened, the stranger was gone, and Earl Beardy admitted that he'd lost the card game, and so supposedly his soul. Not much more is said about immediately after the card game, but it is said that Earl Beardy died a few years afterwards, and as he couldn't ascend to heaven without a soul, he's now stuck in Glamis Castle, the place where he lost to the devil. For years after his death, people would hear loud, booming shouting, cursing and swearing coming from the room where the infamous card game was held. So much so that they decided to brick up the room, hoping that it would help, but the noises didn't stop. The figure of a large bearded man has also been seen wandering around the castle, thought to be Earl Beardy himself. Sometimes he's stamping his feet and cursing, which I know is supposed to be like a really creepy image of a ghost being seen and whatnot, but just the thought of this grown man stamping his feet and having a little tantrum like a toddler, I don't know, it just tickled me a little bit. Like, maybe know when to call it a night, don't barter away your soul. You got scammed, babes. There was a famous story though of when a nobleman was staying in the castle as a guest along with her family, and she woke up in the middle of the night to see the giant figure of a bearded man dressed in armour walking through her bedroom and into an adjoining room, the same room where her kid was asleep. Oh no you don't. She leapt out of bed and scrambled into her kid's room to find the child already awake, screaming about how they'd woken up as well, only to see a huge bearded man leaning over the bed staring at them. But when they looked around the room, there was nowhere for this guy to go, but he was nowhere to be seen. Absolutely not. No thank you, Earl Beardy. We'll be having none of that. So while the ghost of Earl Beardy is still seen around the castle, his secret sealed off room still seems to be just that, a secret, a legend, something we're probably never going to get to the bottom of. But Earl Beardy's story is just one of many here. Glamis Castle is referenced a lot as one of the most haunted castles in Scotland. And when you hear the rest of this ghostly lineup, I mean, you can see why. There seems to be a lot going on here. So much so that when Sir Walter Scott, the novelist and poet, stayed at the castle in 1793, he said that when his guide left him for the night and he heard door after door shut behind him, he felt closer to the dead rather than the living. And I can understand that sentiment, especially when you find yourself in the chapel, because that seems to be a hotspot for one entity in particular, known as the Grey Lady. And the Grey Lady of Glamis Castle is said to be Lady Janet Douglas, who married John Lyon, the 6th Lord of Glamis in the 16th century. They happily lived at Glamis Castle together though, they had 4 kids, everything was fine, but all that would change in September 1528 when John Lyon died. Because the thing was, Janet had a brother, Archibald Douglas, who happened to be the stepfather of King James V, the king at the time. And King James, he hated Archibald, who'd kept James as a prisoner when he was younger. The bad blood ran deep. The king absolutely loathed the entire Douglas family, Janet included. King James initially tried to have her imprisoned by saying that she had been the one to kill her husband by poisoning him, but that didn't stick. Janet moved on, remarried and had another son, but King James wasn't done with her. She was arrested again, this time on a charge of possibly witchcraft or treason, as she she was suspected of trying to poison the king himself. It was basically a witchcraft charge with a poison plot at the centre of it. Either way, she was imprisoned in Edinburgh Castle along with her son John, while King James took over Glamis Castle. To get the testimony he needed to seal the deal though, King James had to resort to torturing her clansmen and servants, basically using that to force a false confession out of them that, yeah, of course, Lady Janet was plotting to kill you, because in reality, she had no enemies other than obviously the king. She had a spotless record, a great reputation, so forced confessions seemed to be the only way to go about it. Lady Janet was found guilty and sentenced to death, and she was burned at the stake on Castle Hill in Edinburgh on the same day, the 17th of July, 1537. Her teenage son John, who she'd been imprisoned alongside, he was also accused. When he was threatened with torture, he just signed the false confession, which landed him a death sentence as well. Luckily for him, he wasn't executed, just locked up in Edinburgh Castle for a while. But as for his mother, she's said to have returned to Glamis, and she seems to be most fond of the castle chapel. There have been a few sightings of her in here over the years. She's almost always described as a shimmering, almost translucent figure, wearing a grey dress, and perhaps unsurprisingly, based on what happened to her, the feeling of overwhelming sadness is felt when she's thought to be present. A very interesting encounter with her apparition was when Rose Constance Bowes-Lyon, the Queen Mother's eldest sister, was playing on the chapel organ one day, and we're talking like very late 19th century, turn of the 20th century kind of time. It was a bright sunny day, nothing creepy about it, until she just got the feeling like she wasn't alone in the room anymore. She just looked around her, like checking the room out, making sure no one had decided to sneak in and watch her while she practiced, when she saw her. A small woman dressed in grey and kneeling in prayer in one of the pews of the chapel. Okay, maybe she just is a visitor and came in to pray. That happens. But at that moment, the sun came out, and as it shone through the windows, Rose could see that the light was shining straight through the woman, making a pattern on the floor. Rose said she didn't feel threatened though, or scared, anything like that, so she decided to just turn around and keep on playing, a bit of musical accompaniment while the Lady Janet continued to pray. By the time Rose had finished practice, the figure had vanished. And I mean, after everything that she went through, right to the very end, people are very respectful of the ghost of the Grey Lady. Sometimes if people see her, they'll just back out of the chapel and leave her in peace. Some tour guides, if you visit Glamis Castle, they'll tell you that it's polite to knock on the door of the chapel 3 times, just to let her know that you're about to enter. There is another story of a ghostly woman who is seen outside of the chapel, actually more specifically around the clock tower, and she's sometimes referred to as the White Lady, so separate from Lady Janet, the Grey Lady. But then other times, I found more often than not in the older books, the way that they told the story was that she was just another manifestation of Lady Janet, and when she was seen in the clock tower, she would be glowing red, like the embers of a fire. So whether the White Lady and the Grey Lady are 2 different people, if it is just all Lady Janet, what a horrendous story, and a horrendous way to go. Like, poor Janet did not deserve that. I can totally see why she's still being seen at the castle. There is another entity who definitely appears to be an entirely different character to Lady Janet though, and if you see her, you're gonna remember. It's said that if you're out on the grounds of the castle at midnight, you might spot the figure of a woman sprinting across the lawns, tearing at her mouth or pointing to it in a total panic, because she's known as the tongueless woman. So yeah, there was a guy who was once staying at the castle as a guest who saw her. Initially, this guest said that he was taking a stroll around the grounds and he saw her peeking out at him through one of the castle windows. He described her as being very pale, looking absolutely terrified, and beyond a shadow of a doubt, missing her tongue. You know, just the kind of face that you could never forget. He stopped and tried to interact with her. Clearly, she looked like she needed help, but instead of a reply, this woman let out a blood-curdling scream, the kind that gets under your skin and makes you wish that you just carried on walking instead. After a few moments though, he started hearing footsteps coming down some stone steps inside the castle, getting closer towards a wooden door that he was standing near. The door creaked open slowly, and that same woman limped out, rushed past him, and just vanished. Okay. And that was the end of the encounter for that guest at Glamis Castle. But apparently, the story goes on to say that this same guest was holidaying in Italy a few years later, when he got caught out in a blizzard, so an order of monks put him up for the night. They got to chatting about Glamis Castle, and the monks told him a story of a nun that they knew, who used to work there, and had stumbled upon a secret so terrible, it could ruin a very powerful family. So what did this family do to keep their secret? They cut out her tongue. Okay, well that was very intriguing after what the guest had experienced at Glamis Castle beforehand. The monks actually took him to meet this nun, and he was absolutely blown away when he realised that the apparition apparition that he had seen peering at him through the windows and then scurrying out the side door of the castle was this very woman, now standing right in front of him. Only now, she was much older, decades older. Had he seen at Glamis Castle the apparition of a woman who was still alive, but had been silenced and was escaping in that moment? Whether it was just a replay of what you can definitely imagine to be a very emotional, high-energy time, or just a great legend, people now apparently still do see a woman running through the grounds, blood down her face, pointing to her missing tongue, which is just obviously horrifically sad for the woman, but just sounds like nightmare fuel. But aside from the legends and the secrets and the things that may or may not have happened here, there are other ghosts said to be haunting the castle too. There's a young servant boy, sometimes known as the ghost of the page, who is said to haunt the Queen Mother's sitting room. The story with him goes that he was a bit of a prankster in life, nothing super nefarious, just kid stuff, getting under people's feet, getting distracted and going off and playing, not exactly being the quiet, obedient page boy that was expected of him. To punish him, he would be made to go sit on this freezing cold stone step in the sitting room and basically think about what you've done. Well, one brutally cold night, the young boy had again been made to sit on this stone, but instead of coming and relieving him, everybody forgot and went off to bed. The poor lad though, like bless his little heart, he stayed put, he did as he was told, but by morning he'd frozen to death, sitting on the stone. And reading between the lines, like this is obviously total speculation, but I'm guessing he wouldn't have been in the best physical health, wearing not warm clothes and left in a part of the castle that wasn't heated overnight, so yeah, maybe that's how hypothermia could have set in, but poor little guy, honestly. But now, according to the stories, his ghost gets his own back on people walking through the sitting room by sticking his foot out and tripping up anyone who isn't paying attention. But when they look back at where they tripped, there's nothing there. Elsewhere in the castle, there's another chamber. This one is nicknamed the Hangman's Chamber, separate from the Haunted Chamber. In here, the story goes that a butler took his own life and now continues to haunt the room. But going all the way back to the beginning, supposedly, King Malcolm himself is said to still wander Glamis Castle, or as he probably knows it, the site of the hunting lodge where he passed away. But no word on who's seen him, how he manifests, like anything like that though. But aside from the named cast of ghostly characters haunting the place, there's a whole bunch of other strangeness reported to be going on at Glamis. There's a man in a long cloak fastened up to his neck seen walking straight through a locked door on one of the staircases, as if he has every right to be here and doors aren't going to stop him. Staff and visitors have reported hearing footsteps echoing in empty corridors, doors slamming or opening on their own even when they're bolted. Weird knocking has been heard coming from inside solid, thick stone castle walls, and voices have been heard whispering in people's ears, only there's no one around them. But then, the sounds of some whole scene from the past can sometimes be heard. There's a story from the late 1800s when a guest called Miss McGinney was staying at the castle overnight. She woke up to a massive racket outside her room, clanging, banging, what sounded like heavy footsteps in chainmail getting closer and closer to her. She sat up in bed, heart pounding in her chest, as she realised what it was that she might be hearing outside her door. It sounded like an actual medieval fight going on. Weapons clashing, men grunting, the full-on sounds of a fight to the death between two guys. All of a sudden, there was one last horrifying, sickening smack, like an axe hitting metal, and then a dull thud as a body slumped to the floor. There was a beat of silence until she heard something heavy and encased in metal being dragged away. She waited for a second, not wanting to come face to face with what absolutely sounded like a murder that had just happened, but when she got brave enough to peek outside her door, there was nothing out of place. No bodies, no blood, not a trace of anything that had just happened. If a man had just been killed in a particularly brutal way mere seconds ago, there's gonna be at least some hint of it, right? So it sounds like something residual was going on there, but makes you wonder what happened for those sounds to be replaying. And I don't know where in the castle this happened, but it is interesting that people especially don't seem to like the upper hallways near the clock tower, and then in some of the older bedrooms you might get this super heavy feeling like you're absolutely not alone, even when you are categorically the only person around. But if all of that isn't enough to creep you out, try walking walking past the castle's old portraits and antiques and things. Some visitors swear the eyes follow you, or they claim to feel a presence sitting in certain chairs, just watching. No thank you. But with the stories at Glamis Castle, for all the legends, the different versions, there is one that I don't even know how to describe it. It's a ghost barrel. Yeah, like a wooden barrel that no one can see. I don't know, let me explain. There was a woman visiting her cousin who worked in the castle, and she was just left to her own devices one day, and this was around the 19th century, and she decided to have a nosy around and explore. All of a sudden, she bumped into something that she couldn't see, what she described as an invisible barrel lying on its side. When she tried to kick it, as naturally that's what you do in that situation, she hurt her foot. Like, she had pain from kicking this thing, even though there was nothing there. She looked around her, she could see other things, like vision wasn't a problem. And so obviously at that point, she panicked and ran for the stairs, only to hear the sound of the barrel thumping and rolling after her all the way down. She met her cousin at the bottom of the staircase, who immediately knew what was going on and warned her, do not look back, as it's going to get so much worse. But also, do not ever talk about what you've seen, or I guess not seen. But then we've got this story, so she did talk. And the sources say that she died not too long after talking. I don't think the cousin ever elaborated on what the barrel was, how it could get worse if you look behind you, but yeah, ghost barrel. Honestly, some of the stories that I was coming across for this, the Victorians, they had reams of content about this place. Like the nightmare hand, need to tell you about this one. A guy called Mr. Vance met a creepy gardener on the grounds of Glamis who gifted him this weird, deformed skeleton hand, but warned him, do not look at this before bed. So what does Mr. Vance do? He got curious and looked at it before bed, and then proceeded to have a full-on horror movie nightmare where the hand came to life as a shadowy figure thing and tried to strangle him. So moral of the story, don't accept creepy souvenirs from strangers, I guess. But with Glamis Castle, with all of the stories and legends and hearsay, what are the horrifying secrets hidden inside? The truth is, no one knows. And maybe that's why people keep talking about this haunted castle, because there are always stories of rumours, hidden rooms, ghosts that no one can really explain. And so if you ever get to visit Glamis, maybe just keep an eye on the walls and look out for secrets that don't want to stay buried. Because, oh my life, how many different versions of stories does one castle need? There were a lot of legends tied to this place, and even more versions of legends for each one. So if you've heard something that I haven't mentioned in this video, pop it in the comments. I did, however, notice that a lot of these stories about Glamis Castle originated in the 19th century. A lot of these Victorian Gothic ghost stories. A time when ghost stories were all the rage. So that is something to bear in mind. Most of these stories were older ones. I didn't come across much that was substantial in the way of modern day witness accounts. So if you've ever experienced something there or know someone who has, again, I want to know about it. Please do comment below. Personally, regardless of the stories and the legends, I always feel a little bit funny when I can't verify things anyway, so I will always add a very hearty pinch of salt when I cannot trace something back to a historical record. But I definitely do think that Glamis Castle is haunted. It's an old building, it's seen centuries of life and death. Lots of high emotion situations would have played out within those stone walls, so absolutely. Although with all the different versions and the almost mythical level legends surrounding the place, it's going to be pretty impossible to tell which entities are which and what their backstory is. Apart from the Grey Lady, everyone seemed to agree on her story and where she haunts and what she's seen doing and things. But like I say, with the bigger legends, the so-called monster of Glamis Castle, I don't believe that there was a monster that looked the way he was described and was supernatural and then hidden away in a secret room. But I can believe that there was a family member born with deformities and was hidden away. So whether the rumours started in that a monster was invented to keep people away, that could be a possible origin. But then even with the ghost of the monster that's said to have been seen, maybe he wasn't a monster in the supernatural sense, but instead he was the ghost of the family member who was shut away, if that makes sense. I think perhaps the look of the castle may have something to do with the boom in stories in the 19th century, because, I mean, look at it, it's the perfect setting. And it already had this haunted, or at least haunting, reputation in Shakespeare's time, as he chose Glamis as the setting for Macbeth, as the place where Macbeth stabbed King Duncan. It has also got to be said, Glamis Castle is obviously a visitor attraction, as well as being the family home of the Bowes Lions. They do run ghost tours, so they make money from the paranormal, and so then keeping these legends and stories alive is good business for them, which also then gives less incentive to actually want to find these secret rooms if they haven't already been found, because what if they don't find any? Or what if they do and they reveal proof that none of the legends are real? All stuff to just bear in mind and help form your own conclusions. But as always, let me know your thoughts. If you enjoyed this video, let me know by giving it a little like, and if you haven't already and you enjoyed the ghost stories here, maybe you'd like to subscribe to my channel too. But anyway, that is all from me today. Go get a drink of water. I need you to stay hydrated. No, I will be for the rest of the day. I have one arm entirely wrapped in cling film right now during this 30-degree heat. I think I've sweated out everything that I've drank in the last hour or so. Too much information, Claire. Anyway, cannot wait to chat with you more about the morbid, mysterious and macabre. So until next time, sleep safe. And having a toddler tantrum? A toddler tantrum. That's hard.